Some people don't just waste your time, they corrupt your soul. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it's disguised as friendship, loyalty, or love. But little by little, their presence chips away at your clarity, your peace, your discipline. And if you're not careful, you don't just lose time, you lose yourself. The Stoics knew this danger well. They didn't just teach how to master the mind. They warned very clearly who you must avoid if you want to live with virtue and strength. Because your environment isn't neutral. Every person you allow into your life is either sharpening your character or slowly dulling it. In today's episode, we're going to walk through the 10 dangerous types of people the Stoic philosophers, from Marcus Aurelius to Seneca to Epictetus, told us to watch for, not with fear, but with awareness. Because protecting your energy, your time, and your values is not selfish, it's essential. So ask yourself, are there people around you quietly pulling you away from the life you're trying to build? Let's begin. 1. The chronic complainer. There's a quiet kind of poison that seeps into your life not through betrayal, violence, or chaos, but through endless, unchanging negativity. You don't notice it at first. It shows up in the form of a friend venting, a co-worker unloading their daily frustrations, or a family member who always finds something wrong with everything. But over time, something strange happens. You begin to feel heavier after each conversation, less hopeful, less motivated, as if someone is slowly dimming your inner fire, and you don't even realize it. This is the power of the chronic complainer. They don't just speak negativity, they live in it. Their worldview is anchored in blame, helplessness, and dissatisfaction. And worse, they want company, because complaining, like misery, needs an audience. And if you're not careful, that audience becomes you. The Stoics were clear: we must guard our minds as fiercely as we guard our homes. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." But what he didn't say, and what we must now realize, is that we absorb not only our own thoughts, but the tone of those we allow too close. If your environment is saturated with complaints, you start to mirror it. You lower your standards. You begin to see problems instead of possibilities. Stoicism teaches us to focus on what we can control, to take responsibility for our perspective, our actions, and our inner state, regardless of what the outside world does. Chronic complainers do the opposite. They externalize everything. Nothing is ever their fault. They see life as something that happens to them, not something they have the power to shape. And if you spend enough time around that mindset, it starts to feel normal. But here's the truth. Complaining is not the same as processing. Processing involves intention. It seeks growth, resolution, or understanding. Complaining, by contrast, is a loop. It circles around the same problems without ever reaching a solution. It becomes a form of emotional inertia, movement without progress. And when you constantly absorb that energy, it leaves you mentally exhausted and emotionally stagnant. Seneca warned us, associate with people who are likely to improve you. It's not arrogance, it's self-preservation, because you cannot pour energy into your goals if someone is draining your hope every day. You cannot practice discipline if you're surrounded by those who glorify their excuses. You cannot grow if you're constantly pulled into someone else's emotional whirlpool. So ask yourself, who in your life always has a complaint but never a plan? Who vents endlessly but resists every solution? Who seems addicted to their own misery and expects you to listen, absorb, nod, and carry it with them? You don't have to cut people off in anger, but you do have to protect your clarity. That might mean limiting your exposure. That might mean changing the subject, refusing to feed the cycle, or gently setting boundaries. And in some cases, it might mean stepping away entirely. Because life is hard enough, you don't need people who multiply the weight. You need people who help you carry it, or remind you that you're strong enough to do so yourself. 2. The manipulator. Not all harm comes from those who shout. Some of the most dangerous people whisper, with carefully chosen words, subtle guilt, and silent expectations. They don't raise their voice, but they bend your will. They don't attack your body, but they twist your mind. And when you finally realize what's happening, it's not anger you feel, it's confusion. Because manipulators don't just violate your boundaries, they make you feel guilty for having any at all. The Stoics valued clarity, rationality, and truth. In a world full of emotion-driven reactions, they taught us to seek inner stillness, to sharpen our perception so we could see people as they are, not as they pretend to be. And the manipulator thrives in exactly the opposite environment, one where emotions are blurred, roles are undefined, and truth is always slightly out of reach. These people use your empathy as a tool. They learn your patterns, your insecurities, your triggers, not to understand you, but to control you. One day they praise you, the next they withdraw. One moment you feel supported, the next you feel indebted. And somehow, without ever making direct threats, they manage to make you feel responsible for their feelings, their needs, their chaos. The manipulator doesn't confront, they confuse. They wrap their control in kindness. They use silence as punishment. They use flattery as bait. They never say what they mean, but they make sure you feel what they want you to feel. And by the time you recognize the pattern, you've already spent months, maybe years, trying to fix the relationship. But here's what Stoicism reminds us. You are not responsible for the emotions others manufacture to control you. Your only responsibility is to your own clarity, to your own values, to your own inner compass. Epictetus urged us to seek truth over appearance, to develop our judgment so we aren't deceived by others or by ourselves. That means learning to spot manipulation, not just when it's obvious, but when it's subtle. It means noticing when your gut tells you something is off, even if the words sound perfect. It means trusting yourself again, because once you start shrinking your needs to keep someone else comfortable, you're no longer in a relationship, you're in a performance, and that performance costs you your peace. So how do you deal with the manipulator? Start with awareness. Watch the patterns. Write things down if you must. Look at what happens after conversations, not just during them. How do you feel? Empowered or guilty? Clear or confused? Seen or used? Then set boundaries, firm, quiet, unwavering. You don't need to argue. You don't need to justify, but you do need to protect your energy. The manipulator will push back. They'll test you. But if you stay centered, if you stay grounded in truth, their power weakens, because manipulation feeds on your doubt. When you remove that, they have nothing left to feed on. Remember, a Stoic is not naive. A Stoic sees clearly, loves wisely, and never trades truth for comfort. 3. The emotionally explosive. Some people don't communicate, they detonate. You never know what will trigger them. A question, a delay, a disagreement. And suddenly, you're in the middle of an emotional storm you didn't create. Their voice rises, their face tightens, their energy shifts the entire room. And just like that, logic disappears. Conversation becomes confrontation, and you're left trying to stay calm while someone else's chaos crashes over you. The emotionally explosive person is not just difficult, they're dangerous to your inner peace, because their outbursts don't just disrupt the moment. They rewire your nervous system over time. You start anticipating their moods, tiptoeing around their emotions, modifying your truth to avoid provoking them, and slowly you stop being yourself around them. You become a version of you that survives, but doesn't live. Marcus Aurelius saw this clearly. He wrote, "How much more harmful are the consequences of anger than the causes of it?" That line is a warning. Anger doesn't just hurt others, it deforms the one who holds it. It burns through clarity, kills dialogue, and justifies cruelty in the name of being honest. But honesty without discipline is not a virtue. It's a weapon. Stoicism teaches us to master our impulses, to respond, not react, to keep the flame of reason lit, even when provoked. But the emotionally explosive person is ruled by impulse. They don't manage their emotions, they unleash them. And if you are constantly in their orbit, it becomes almost impossible to remain grounded. Their fire consumes your peace, their rage becomes your problem. But here's the truth you must remember. You are not responsible for someone else's lack of emotional regulation. You can offer compassion, yes. You can model calm behavior. But you are not a sponge for someone else's volatility. If every disagreement leads to shouting, if every mistake becomes a meltdown, if every boundary sparks retaliation, you are not in a safe space. So what do? First, stop taking responsibility for their reactions. Let go of the illusion that if you just say the right thing, you can prevent the next explosion. You can't. Their reactions are about them, their expectations, their wounds, their unresolved battles. Second, anchor yourself. The Stoic trains for these moments. When others are loud, you become still. When others provoke, you pause. Your power lies in your restraint, not in silence born of fear, but in control born of wisdom. And finally, if the pattern continues, despite your clarity, your calm, your patience, you must ask yourself, what am I sacrificing to stay in this environment? Because no relationship, no job, no situation is worth your emotional safety. Peace is not a luxury. It's a baseline for growth. You deserve to be in spaces where truth can be spoken without fear, where tension doesn't escalate into destruction, where presence doesn't feel like walking through a minefield. Protect that peace, because once you lose it, the cost is much higher than any conflict. 4. The gossip. They smile in your face, but speak daggers behind your back. The gossip is a master of surface charm. They know how to make you feel included, trusted, even admired, until you realize their affection is a currency they spend recklessly. What they say to you, they will say about you. What they whisper in confidence today becomes entertainment for someone else tomorrow. And by the time the damage is done, your name is on the table, but you were never invited to defend it. The Stoics warned us against these people for a reason. Epictetus, in particular, was clear. Associate only with those who improve you. Gossip never improves. It corrodes, not just reputations, but character. Because if you spend enough time listening to gossip, laughing along, nodding silently, it doesn't just stain the target. It stains you. You become what you tolerate. And when you tolerate gossip, you participate in it, even if you never speak. It shifts the way you view others. You start looking for flaws instead of virtues. You become more suspicious, less trusting, more judgmental. And that lens eventually turns inward too, feeding your own insecurities and fears of being talked about when you're not around. But here's the deeper danger. Gossips don't need truth to destroy. They only need access. And the more access you give them to your thoughts, your past, your weaknesses, the more ammunition they collect. Not necessarily out of malice, but out of habit. Because gossiping isn't just a behavior for them, it's a way of life, a substitute for depth, a distraction from self-examination. Stoicism calls us to rise above this noise, to speak only what is necessary, what is helpful, what reflects virtue. Marcus Aurelius urged us to waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. And that includes what we do with our words, and whose words we allow near us. If someone constantly brings you gossip, you can be certain they're bringing you to someone else. It doesn't matter how much they seem to like you. Gossip is not loyalty. It's instability disguised as connection. So how do you deal with a gossip? Start by refusing to feed the fire. You don't need to argue or confront dramatically. Sometimes a change in subject is enough. Sometimes silence speaks louder than agreement. And if needed, be direct. Without cruelty, but with clarity. I'd rather not talk about people who aren't here to speak for themselves. You'll learn a lot from their reaction. If they get defensive, they weren't seeking truth. They were seeking entertainment. If they respect your boundary, you may have offered them a mirror they've never seen before. But most importantly, be mindful of what you say. Gossip is contagious. And even the most disciplined person can slip if they're constantly surrounded by those who glorify drama over dignity. So protect your words, speak with integrity, and remember, if someone can't feel powerful without tearing others down, they're not someone you need in your circle. 5. The Flatterer. Not everyone who praises you is on your side. In fact, some of the most dangerous people you'll ever meet won't criticize you at all. They'll praise you constantly, not because they admire you, but because they want something from you. They've learned that manipulation wrapped in compliments is harder to see, harder to resist, and far more effective than confrontation. The flatterer doesn't speak to your soul, they speak to your ego, and they do it well. They know how to mirror your desires, echo your opinions, validate your choices, even when they don't believe in them, especially when they don't believe in them, because flattery is not about truth. It's about access, and access leads to influence. The Stoics were deeply suspicious of excessive praise. Why? Because they understood human nature. They knew that our ego is always hungry to be seen, to be affirmed, to feel important, and the flatterer knows how to feed that hunger. But what they feed you isn't nourishment, it's sugar. It tastes good in the moment, it keeps you coming back, but it leaves you empty and eventually dependent. Seneca warned us about this in subtle ways, reminding us to be harsh with yourself and lenient with others. Why? Because real growth doesn't come from people who constantly tell you you're doing great. It comes from people who challenge you to do better, lovingly, truthfully, and without hidden motives. The flatterer doesn't want your growth. They want your compliance, your attention, your loyalty, not to truth, but to them. And often their praise comes right before a request, before a shift in power, before they need you to overlook something, agree with something, tolerate something. That's when you realize their compliments were never about you. They were about control. Flattery is the language of opportunists. It's subtle, it's seductive, and if you're not grounded in self-awareness, it can lead you far from your values before you even realize what's happening. Because praise feels good, especially when you're doubting yourself, especially when you're tired. But the Stoic asks, is it true? Is it earned? Is it helpful? Real affirmation doesn't flatter your ego, it feeds your spirit. It challenges you. It holds you to a higher standard, not a more comfortable one, and it comes without conditions, without strings, without manipulation. So how do you protect yourself from the flatterer? Start by watching patterns. Does their praise come only when they need something? Do they avoid giving honest feedback? Do they change their tone depending on who has power? And most of all, how do you feel after their praise? Empowered, clear, or slightly entangled? And then, check your ego, because the best protection against flattery is self-respect. When you know who you are, you don't need constant affirmation. You can receive a compliment without becoming addicted to it. You can thank someone for their kind words without losing your center. Because at the end of the day, Stoicism isn't about rejecting all praise. It's about recognizing the difference between truth and temptation, and having the strength to choose truth every time. 6. The victim of their own excuses. There's a certain kind of person who never takes responsibility, not for their failures, not for their actions, not even for their life. Something is always in the way: a bad boss, a difficult childhood, an unfair world. And while many of these struggles may be real, this person doesn't seek to overcome them. They cling to them, because their identity is built on avoidance, not accountability. They are not victims of fate. They are prisoners of their own excuses. And the Stoics had no patience for this mindset. To them, life was difficult by nature, unpredictable, harsh, even cruel at times. But that was not a justification for passivity. It was a call to courage. As Seneca said, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." Difficulty is not an obstacle to growth. It is the growth. But for the chronic excuse maker, every trial becomes a reason to stay stuck. And if you spend enough time around them, their mindset starts to rub off on you, not because they argue with you, but because they normalize inaction. You begin to question your own ambition. You start to feel guilty for striving. You hear them justify their lack of discipline so often, you begin to wonder if discipline itself is unrealistic. That's how this type becomes dangerous, not because they attack your values, but because they erode them silently. And the most insidious part, they often see themselves as the most realistic person in the room. They'll call your efforts naive, your focus too intense, your growth a phase. Because if you improve, if you rise above excuses, it forces them to confront their own. Stoicism demands something higher. It demands that we stop waiting for ideal conditions, that we act even when we're afraid, that we move forward even if we're unsure, because the longer you entertain excuses, the harder it becomes to escape them. And the people who live in that mindset, they will pull you down, not out of malice, but because your rise challenges their comfort. So what should you do? Start with empathy. But don't confuse empathy with enablement. You can understand someone's pain without agreeing with their resignation. You can offer support without sacrificing your standards. And if their presence begins to weigh on your mindset, you must decide, am I lifting them or are they dragging me? You are not heartless for outgrowing people who refuse to grow. You are not cruel for wanting to be around those who take ownership of their lives. That's not ego, that's alignment. And alignment is what separates movement from momentum. It's what keeps you climbing when others stay parked at the bottom of the mountain, building shrines to their excuses. Remember, your progress will never threaten the right people, but it will expose the ones hiding behind their own limitations. 7. The addict to pleasure. Not all prisons have walls. Some are built from comfort. There's a kind of person who lives moment to moment, chasing anything that feels good, food, distractions, stimulation, validation, indulgence. Their days are not built on purpose but on escape. They don't seek depth. They seek relief. Not because they're evil or broken, but because they've become addicted to the path of least resistance. And that path, though tempting, always leads away from meaning. The Stoics saw this clearly. Pleasure itself was not the enemy. Attachment to it was. When comfort becomes your compass, discipline dies, and when discipline dies, so does freedom. Epictetus taught, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And the pursuit of constant pleasure, especially in today's world, is almost always rooted in trying to control how we feel. We want to avoid boredom, avoid sadness, avoid discomfort. So we scroll, snack, spend, and sedate. We look for quick highs to distract us from slow truths. But the Stoic path is the opposite. It's about choosing discomfort when it leads to growth, choosing stillness when noise is easier, choosing hunger when indulgence weakens the body, choosing silence when our ego craves attention. Because every time you resist a passing pleasure, you build something stronger: resilience, clarity, inner power. The addict to pleasure is not inherently malicious. They may be charming, even fun to be around. But look closer. Their habits often lack intention. Their commitments are inconsistent. Their moods swing with their cravings. And when life demands sacrifice, patience, or endurance, they collapse. And if you walk too closely with someone like this, their patterns can become yours. You start justifying small compromises. You skip the hard work today, telling yourself you'll catch up tomorrow. You trade long-term peace for short-term comfort. And little by little, your own edge dulls. Stoicism isn't about rejecting all joy. It's about refining your joy. It's about distinguishing between fleeting gratification and lasting fulfillment. A Stoic may enjoy a glass of wine, a moment of laughter, a beautiful sunset. But they do not need these things to function. Their center remains intact. Their identity is not built on how good life feels, but on how well they endure when it doesn't. So what can you do? Begin by observing the role of pleasure in your own life. What habits make you feel empowered afterward? And which ones leave you feeling numb or scattered? What temptations weaken your focus, your health, your integrity? Then, create space. Choose small discomforts intentionally. Wake earlier. Delay gratification. Skip the empty pleasure. Not to punish yourself, but to reclaim your strength. Because every time you say no to what is easy, you say yes to what is essential. You are not here to feel good every moment. You are here to become someone who can handle every moment, with clarity, with courage, with calm. And that begins by breaking the addiction to comfort. 8. The envious. Envy is the silent assassin of the soul. Unlike anger, it doesn't shout. Unlike manipulation, it doesn't ask. It hides behind compliments, behind silence, behind distant smiles. But underneath, it burns. The envious person doesn't just want what you have. They resent you for having it. Your progress unsettles them. Your joy reminds them of their stagnation. And the more you rise, the more they rot, not visibly, but quietly within. The Stoics saw envy not just as a moral flaw, but as a kind of illness, a self-inflicted suffering. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And what thought is more poisonous than, "Why them and not me?" The envious live in that question. They measure their worth not by their own values, but by the lives of others. And so, even if they win, It never feels like enough, because someone, somewhere, is always doing better. The danger of envy is not just that it distorts how someone sees you, but how they make you see yourself. They might minimize your achievements, change the subject when you share good news, offer backhanded compliments, or even copy you, only to criticize what they imitate. They won't say they're threatened, they'll act like they're unimpressed. But make no mistake, the envious don't hate you because of your flaws. They resent you because you reflect something they've denied in themselves: effort, courage, or direction. And if you're not careful, their energy can infect your path. You might start hiding your wins, shrinking your light, apologizing for your joy. Why? Because it feels safer than making others uncomfortable. But this is a dangerous trade. When you dim yourself to soothe someone else's shadow, you betray your own growth. Nietzsche called envy the most honest of human emotions because it reveals what people secretly admire. But in the hands of the undisciplined, admiration turns toxic. It doesn't inspire, it attacks. So how do you protect yourself? First, recognize the signs. Does this person celebrate you when you succeed, or go silent? Do they support your growth, or subtly undermine it? Do they lift others, or only feel strong by comparison? Second, guard your spirit. You don't owe your light to people who flinch at it. You don't need to hide your strength to keep someone else comfortable in their weakness. A Stoic doesn't boast, but they also don't shrink. They live aligned, without apology. And third, don't become them. Envy is contagious. In a world of curated lives and constant comparison, it's easy to slip into measuring yourself against others. But remember what the Stoics taught. Your path is yours alone. What others do, achieve, or become has nothing to do with your virtue. Stay focused, stay steady, stay sovereign. Because when you rise with grace, not arrogance, with gratitude, not entitlement, you don't just escape envy, you outgrow it. 9. The time waster. Some people don't steal from your wallet, they steal from your life. They don't come with malice or bad intentions. In fact, they often seem harmless, even friendly. But their presence is a slow erosion. A few hours here, a few distractions there, conversations that lead nowhere, plans that never materialize, dreams talked about endlessly but never acted on, and before you know it, you've given away the one thing you can never get back: your time. Seneca was ruthless on this point. People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful. And it's true. We protect our money, our homes, our privacy. But we give our hours, our attention, our sacred focus to anyone who asks for it. The time waster isn't always lazy. Sometimes they're busy, but busy with the trivial. They chase entertainment, gossip, drama, or pointless tasks. They have no direction, no urgency, no deeper sense of meaning. And the danger? They don't want to be alone in that feeling, so they invite you into it. And if you're not vigilant, you begin to drift with them. Their favorite phrases are, "Let's just chill," "What's the rush?" or "You take life too seriously." But these aren't casual remarks. They are invitations to abandon your discipline, because the more serious you are about your life, the more your presence exposes how unserious they are about theirs. So instead of rising with you, they slow you down. And it doesn't take much. A few missed mornings, a few wasted weekends, a few too many laters and tomorrows, and suddenly you're not where you thought you'd be. Not because you lacked ability, but because you let people steal your fire without even noticing. The Stoics were obsessed with time, not because they feared death, but because they revered life. They saw every day as a complete unit, a chance to live fully, to move deliberately, to train the mind, body, and soul. And to share your limited hours with someone who has no respect for that is not generosity, it's neglect. So how do you identify a time waster? Look for patterns. Are they always available, but never progressing? Do they complain, but never act? Do they want your attention, but not your growth? Do you leave their company feeling inspired or empty? And more importantly, who are you becoming around them? Because time wasters don't just drain your schedule, they dull your ambition. They make drifting look normal. They normalize delay. And every moment you spend entertaining mediocrity is a moment you lose strengthening your excellence. You don't need to be cruel, but you do need to be clear. Your time is not cheap. Your vision is not negotiable. And your life, this one brief, beautiful, finite life, should not be spent explaining to people why you care so deeply about becoming something greater. Let your calendar reflect your values. Let your circle reflect your standards. Let your time go only to those who honor it with their own. 10. The morally corrupt. There are people who don't just ignore virtue, they mock it. To them, integrity is weakness, honesty is naive, discipline is unnecessary. They wear their cunning like a badge of honor, and their disregard for decency as a sign of strength. These are not people who merely stumble from time to time. They are those who choose the path of vice, who justify it, glamorize it, and try to pull others into it. The morally corrupt are dangerous not only because of what they do, but because of how they make you feel about what you do. When you stand for truth, they call it rigidity. When you set boundaries, they call it arrogance. When you refuse to cheat, cut corners, or manipulate, they laugh, as if virtue were some outdated relic of a weaker time. But here's the Stoic truth. Integrity is not weakness. It is power under control. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That kind of clarity terrifies the morally corrupt, because people who live with conscience expose those who don't, not through confrontation, but through contrast. Just by being consistent, honest, and fair, you threaten the identity they've built around shortcuts and shadows. These people don't want growth. They want justification. They don't reflect, they deflect. And they aren't interested in accountability unless it serves them. They are clever, yes, often successful on the surface. But beneath the charm and charisma lies a dangerous hollowness, a disconnect between what they say and who they are. And that gap is where damage begins. Stoicism teaches us that the good life is not found in outcomes, but in character. What matters is not what the world thinks of you, but what you think of yourself when the world isn't watching. That's the true test. And the morally corrupt fail it every time, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack alignment. So how do you protect yourself? Don't get pulled into their cynicism. Don't let their mockery plant seeds of doubt in your values. Don't start compromising in small ways, telling yourself it's harmless. Because every time you ignore your inner compass to fit in, to get ahead, or to avoid conflict, you erode something sacred. Seneca said, "No man was ever wise by chance. Wisdom takes effort, and that effort includes choosing your company with care. The people around you are not neutral, they shape you. And if you spend enough time around those who celebrate betrayal, deception, and indulgence, your standards will slowly adjust downward. But when you walk with the virtuous, even imperfectly, you rise. You strengthen your core, you speak more clearly, you act more deliberately, not to impress anyone, but to remain true to yourself. So avoid those who call virtue a joke, who see morality as optional, who seek power without principle, because at the end of this life, the only thing that will matter is not what you built, but who you became while building it. Some people won't stab you in the back. They'll slowly unravel you while standing right beside you, not with hatred, not with violence, but with subtle habits, quiet energy, and values that contradict everything you're trying to become. That's why the Stoics were so clear. Your environment shapes your mind shapes your actions, and your actions shape your destiny. It's never just about who you spend time with. It's about what they awaken in you. In this episode, we explored 10 types of people the Stoic wise men warned us to avoid, not because we are better than them, but because we are serious about living better. The complainer who poisons progress, the manipulator who bends truth, the explosive who burns peace, the gossip who corrupts trust, the flatterer who deceives with sweetness, the excuse maker who avoids growth, the pleasure addict who escapes discomfort, the envious who resents your light, the time waster who steals your purpose, and the morally corrupt who glorify the very thing you've worked hard to overcome. Avoiding them isn't about ego, it's about alignment. It's about protecting the version of you that's still under construction, the one that's trying, failing, learning, and rebuilding. Because every conversation, every relationship, every influence either moves you closer to your values or pulls you away. The Stoics didn't live in isolation. They lived with discernment. They didn't reject people harshly. They simply refused to compromise what they were building for comfort, for approval, or for entertainment. So now it's your turn to reflect. Who around you challenges you to grow? Who drains you? Who lifts you toward truth? And who leads you into distraction? And more importantly, what kind of person are you becoming for others? Because this isn't just about who you avoid. It's about who you decide to be. If this episode helped you see things more clearly, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe to join a growing community of thinkers, seekers, and warriors of the mind. And remember, protect your peace, choose your company, and never lower your standards for the sake of fitting in.